Welcome back to this final session on public service adaptation. I'm joined here on the stage by Graham Simmons, iESE consultant, and I'm Jonathan Hewish, Chief Executive of Capital People. And online we've got Gerard McCormick from the Improvement Service Scotland. I'll perhaps say a few words by way of introduction. When Graham and I first worked with a number of organisations in England and started talking to Gerard about the pandemic, we were talking in terms of recovery and into this now second lockdown in England and other measures going on in other parts of the UK. I think adaptation is definitely much more of a kind of a word that we really need to use. We've learnt a lot as a country over this course of this pandemic, but actually I think we still got some way to go to implement some of those lessons. We're going to be living for this at least till 2023. We know that, and that's assuming that the vaccination programme, which we're reasonably confident will start in somewhere between December and March, but it's going to take several years to roll out. So it is about living on alongside the coronavirus. We've got another few key facts really, which we need to take into account in our response. First of those is that actually most people, when they're infected with the coronavirus, actually are infected for about 20 days. And it's not untypical for them to be infected 4 to 6 weeks. And our rules currently say you go and self-isolate for 14 days. So that's leaving quite a few days afterwards when people can potentially spread the virus. And of course, that's without necessarily testing to see whether people are still infectious. The other thing that we've learned actually is that as that infection goes through the body, we actually need more than one test. There's no one single test that will tell you whether you're negative or not. You have to test someone to see if they're in the early stages or someone in the latter stages. So we're starting to bring together some of those technologies, and we're starting to think how they apply locally if you want to stay safe. And actually we need to do that at a very granular level and understand that and deploy that. And that means essentially, hopefully, if we deploy those solutions, we can return to not just to normal, not just to surviving, but actually going about a vibrant, useful, enjoyable life, which going into a second lockdown might seem some far away. But, you know, we have also, whilst we've got lessons to learn, come a long way. We have actually some significant successes. So perhaps I'll start by asking Graham if you can say a little about some of the work that you've looked at, looking across English councils and the lessons learned there and what it means in terms of responding to a crisis.
Sure. So I've been looking at two things. So typical council responses to the COVID-19 crisis. But also some of the more general research on crisis and recovery. So a really good place to start is just to literally look at the dictionary, look at what the word crisis means, and it's a tipping point at which, for example, in healthcare, where a patient can go either way, the situation, which is a close parallel with where we're at. I think some crises can be predicted. You can see somebody, getting worse and worse and worse, and then reaching a tipping point. But with something like COVID-19, it's obviously hit us very quickly and very hard indeed. And there are some sort of common themes in the way people have kind of reacted to that. The words that sort of come out really are the sort of initial response stage. So dropping everything, dealing with the immediate response. And crisis, so nothing else matters, just the immediate response. And then as we see, as we went through lockdown, there's, how can we actually restart services? What can we do to get things kind of starting to work again? And then you move more towards, hopefully, as we come out of the second lockdown, trying to look at the future. So how do we actually reimagine the future? And I think none of us actually know what that looks like at the moment. It's just gradually emerging. We're writing the sort of history book as we go with that. And then, ultimately we want to get to renewal, where we're starting to really move forward again in a completely new way, in a completely new world. So there are various variations on that, but those are the kind of broad themes that come out when you look at the research.
Thanks, Graham. Gerard, you've been looking at council's recovery plans in Scotland. Are there common themes there? Are there key lessons learned?
Yeah, thanks. And apologies for not being there in person today with you. But yeah, the themes are broadly similar. We had a look at the renewal plans that were in place over the summer, just to kind of gauge what levels councils were at. And as again, it's highlighted there that they were broadly along the same lines in terms of firstly, the timing of them. So they were varied in terms of some of the topics they covered and the detail they would go into, but essentially they were focusing on 4 timelines, which we kind of categorised, which initially was the kind of current response. And looking from an initial lockdown perspective, that took us from about March to June. And over the summertime, there was then this focus on recovery and renewal planning. So it was the planning phase, and some councils are obviously still going through that at the moment. Moving further afield, as we hopefully start to emerge from this phase of the crisis, there's this kind of notion of transition. So what does it mean for the council? What services do they look to prioritise? How do they start to go about and to redesign services, but also harness some of the opportunities that actually come out of the response? And we can probably come on to some of that later in terms of some of the thematics round about that. But then focusing on, in terms of medium to long-term sustainability, there was very much this kind of notion of what does the new council look like? And potentially now, as I said, there's an opportunity to look at some of the things that perhaps we would like to have done in the past, but the response to the pandemic has actually kind of expedited some of that. So around community mobilisation, around empowerment, around focusing on prevention, etc. In terms of the thematics coming up round about it, there was very much things around kind of focused on the council as a corporate body, what implications for services themselves. Secondly, focusing on the workforce. And it's not just the workforce in terms of the planning for the future, in terms of the skills and experience that are needed, but certainly the demographics of the workforce, the impact that this pandemic has had, and what that means for certain sections of the workforce itself. And then finally, there was a focus on community. So that was kind of how we categorised them. But I would say that they're broadly similar to, as I say, to probably what the experience sounds as if it's been in England as well.
Interesting. So there's some common themes already emerging there. I mean, it's not just about systems and processes, it's about the people. And, you know, most authorities that we speak to talk about they've been running at a furious pace and the dangers of burnout. There's something there about the organisation, its culture and behaviours that's enabled them to achieve what they've achieved.
No, absolutely. Doing some work with one authority at the moment, and it was interesting. First got engaged with them just pre-lockdown, the first lockdown, and very much at that point in the time they were thinking about what the future looked like. They were thinking about an organisational restructuring. Talked to them a month later in the middle of lockdown. All of a sudden it had shifted away from a restructuring into a space of saying, okay, how have our values shifted in the middle of this? What do we need to tweak? What does that mean for our strategy going forwards on a values basis? 2 months later, it had shifted again. And this is kind of an important point, really. It had got to a stage where well-being and mindfulness had taken over. And the focus had been on building teams within the organisation and building team resilience and being able to spread that across the organisation. And there's a whole new set of models that are starting to come through that start to link mindfulness, well-being, into resilience, into adaptability, and then into change. So there's a whole piece of work that's starting to come through, that's starting to say, okay, we need to focus not just on resilience as an individual, we start to need to think of what that looks like as a team. We need to be able to share that, we need to be able to anchor ourselves to things, and especially as decision-making under uncertainty. We've always talked about the fact that in the public sector, there's nothing that changes as much as change.
Yes.
Actually, I think we've pushed that to the limit this year.
I hope.
As one chief exec said to me the other day, so how are we preparing for the next Martian landing? What comes next? Nobody knows. But actually, our ability to be able to respond to that is very much based around resilience. And that very feeling of mindfulness is becoming very, very important now.
I've picked that up actually as sort of practicing change with some local authorities, whereby the one thing they say is we're having to sort of write the book on how to manage remotely. So it's very difficult. Used to being in the office, used to actually walking around, checking on how people are doing. Some employees have taken to it like a duck to water, working remotely. Others need an awful lot of managing, and it needs to be clear what channel of communication they actually prefer. Because if you're not careful, you're trying to text them, email them, and so on. So it's a big challenge.
Yeah, is that something you reflect as well, Gerard?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think this kind of notion of connectedness is really important for employees as well, particularly, where there are teams that are already in place, it becomes a lot easier to I suppose, harness that notion of team spirit. It's particularly when you're in the remote working environment, but you might have people working on themselves on particular projects. So it's about how do we make all that link together, and how do we make people feel part of a team as well. And I think that notion of well-being, I think it's becoming more apparent, because we all kind of jumped into it in the first phase and we just kind of got on with it. And the response, I think, from councils certainly, and probably everywhere across the UK, was phenomenal in terms of what they put together. So I think we're now kind of quite a few months into it, so we're actually thinking more about the well-being phase, thinking more about how do we make sure that people remain part of a team, how do we make sure that they remain part of the organisation and they feel part of the organisation. And I think that's the challenge from a culture and leadership perspective that we probably want to focus on as we move forward. One thing I want to mention as well, and I think it's really important when we talk about local government, councils in particular, is that we sometimes tend to not underappreciate, but forget the sheer scale and range of services that they actually undertake and actually deliver. So to actually then prioritise that and put that into place in an emergency planning situation, as we found ourselves in April, May and June, was nothing short of remarkable. And so it's probably now that we've had a chance to reflect on that these kind of issues around wellbeing are now coming to the fore. Yep. So I think it's useful, I suppose, to take that space to have a think about that. But certainly there's nothing I've heard so far that would kind of diverge from what the thinking is around the table.
And we've had a question come in online, which is around that new world for employees working from home, as everyone's reflected, in terms of that being the new normal, which is a much used phrase these days. There's more new normals than we can cope with. But Michael from Dorset is saying, will council offices disappear completely? Will we ever go back to where we were in terms of people coming into a building? What's your kind of view on that?
I suppose sometimes it depends who you speak to, and certainly in some of the plans that we've seen, there is a notion that we've seen it work, so is there a need to go back to what we did before? Now, with that becomes its own kind of risks, benefits, etc., advantages, disadvantages. I think there's certain aspects of that for me that we need to bear in mind. There's the economic aspect. So we've probably not seen the complete economic impact of the response to the pandemic, and that'll probably be felt quite severely for months, if not years to come. And councils will no doubt be grappling with the notion of the cost effectiveness of potentially having people working from home, aside from the economic benefit that having a council office in a town centre brings to the independent and the small, medium-sized businesses in that particular area at a time when we're looking at economic regeneration. So there's that aspect of it that they'll need to grapple with. I think the second one, I suppose, it's going back to what we were saying earlier, is what becomes default. So when we're thinking about service redesign, thinking about transformation, if we start to get us back to some sort of normality, and put that phrase in brackets, over the next kind of couple of years, do we start to revert to type, which is just go back to doing the way things we always did, or do we actually use this as an opportunity to grasp new opportunities as well, which then may well be much more flexibility, much more working from home. And dare I say it, I think we probably have seen quite an increase in productivity. And there's also environmental impacts as well with regards to that side of things, with less people travelling. So there's all these things in the mix, but on balance, I think there is no doubt there will be a continued emphasis on flexible and remote working. So
continued emphasis, is that something that you'd see, Jonathan?
So there's an important thing that starts to come through in cultural terms about working from home as well. And I'll give you an example. So I had 3 back-to-back meetings not long ago, which were all from home, all on Zoom. And I'm sat there in one meeting, which was for the consultancy that I work for, that I'm chief exec of, very commercial. Half an hour later, I'm in another Zoom meeting, chairing a meeting of a housing association, very social purpose driven. Half an hour later, I'm actually in another session for a membership organisation, which is a very different feel again. But from my perspective, what I'm doing is looking at the same screen and actually some of the same participants across those meetings as well. how do I start to understand what that culture starts to feel like? How I need to behave, what values I connect to, when actually all I'm doing is looking at the same laptop screen all the time.
Yeah.
What does that mean for organisations and their ability to connect through values and culture? And that's going to be a challenge going forward, I think.
Massive challenge, really interesting. Graham, any reflections on that?
Yeah, I've noticed. I mean, it was a really good question, but I don't think it's as black and white as, there won't be any return to the office. I just think the balance will shift. There'll be less need to visit the office. There'll be more flexibility, so there'll be less travel. We might want to travel more socially, though, in the future, so that might make up more of our sort of week. One thing I have sort of pondered on is that there's a massive shortage of social housing and housing generally. And at this time, there's a massive amount of vacant property everywhere, including a lot of local government property. So, you can't tell what the future brings, but, surely there's going to be a time when we don't need such big offices. We need offices, but we don't need huge kind of, parks and land with offices. So, there might be a kind of a way of reusing, what we've actually got in the public realm.
And that itself brings another threat because, of course, during years of austerity, many authorities have invested in property in different ways, shapes and forms as a form of income. So at the same time, we're seeing the changes that will, of course, help our ways of working. Other organisations, you've talked about private sector, you've talked about third sector, are seeing the same thing. So actually, we could be seeing a reduction in the need for commercial property. And that, of course, potentially affects our income streams. Is that something that's come through in the sort of feedback from councils that you've seen?
Yeah, I've seen exactly that, and the whole, I'm dealing with a lot with planning departments at the moment, and the whole, different balance of the way that that's working at the moment. Actually, just as an aside, one of the strange things is that a lot of planning departments are getting a lot more complaints about enforcement. And what they put it down to is the main reason is that we're all at home. So we all now get, irritated by the smallest kind of infringement, whereas before, we spent sort of 60 hours a week out and away.
Yeah, you're not
so
seeing
there
it.
are some bizarre kind of consequences of it.
Is there any sort of discussion of those potential impacts on authority finances, Geraldine, what you've seen?
Yeah, absolutely. Certainly, even from an immediate perspective, there's been huge impacts on the ability of authorities to raise income, whether that's through kind of fees and charges, particularly through parking lets, waste services in some cases, for example, as well. So even in the immediate term, there's certainly a loss of income there, but looking further afield, I think what we will see is another kind of impact of the economic side of this will be the ability of authorities to dispose effectively of assets at potentially a market value that they might have held 12 to 18 months ago. The depreciation over this time period, particularly for, as you say, for commercial property, might also have an additional adverse impact, and therefore is there a need to think a bit more creatively, I suppose, around how we utilise those assets, utilise that space. And obviously Graham mentioned there the ideas around about kind of social housing and whether bringing much more social housing back into town centres is a way of actually starting to reinvigorate them, rather than look to the commercial side of things all the time. So there's definitely options being considered.
Interesting. So we had another couple of questions. They're linked, so I'll maybe direct them to you first, Jonathan. You touched earlier on the importance of staff well-being, and there's certainly have been discussion around staff burnout and the pace that we've currently been running at, and that's going to obviously come back as the numbers infected go up. That home environment brings a challenge of switching off. How can councils seek to support staff in that regard?
So in terms of that, there's resilience is often thought of as people's ability to just keep going under tension. Actually, there's another really important piece in that, which is that recharge space and being able to build that in. And there's a number of responses that are starting to come through the system. So there are one-to-one sessions that are being offered by authorities. There's space to have focus groups talking about not work-based things. So there's a whole series of things that are starting to come through. I think that the challenge is, and it was alluded to there, is actually the scale of this in local government. The support to be able to deliver that kind of capacity of support, it's immense. And I know Alchemy is going to start to look towards coaching, but actually there's space to build that kind of process into there as well, I would have thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess that's something that you guys have both seen in terms of your engagement with the councils. Are there any solutions out there? Is it a question of the scale of this at the moment is just so great that we're going to have to play catch up at some point in time?
I think there may be an element of that, although I do think that councils are trying obviously their utmost to support employees in any way that they can, and even simple things that I suppose that we can do ourselves. And it was mentioned earlier about the notion of having back-to-back Zoom meetings. Yeah. Is that prior to that you would have been able to walk to different meeting rooms and have 10 minutes break, or you'd potentially be on a train going to a different location to go to a meeting, and we don't have that anymore. So I think there's probably a discipline in ourselves that when we're planning our meetings in our own diaries is that we need to think of ourselves sometimes a bit, just to kind of have that 10-minute breathing space, because it can become mentally exhausting to have these meetings one after the other all day. So it's about how do we support people and allow them that space, and don't, I suppose from my perspective as you know, from a leadership perspective, and it's something we all have to think about, is we need to think about the people that we work with and allowing them the space to be able to just have that time out, have that breathing space. As well. So I think there's an onus on us all to be reflective of that, even within our own organisations. But, we speak to a range of councils, and they're certainly looking at the OD side of things now, and the cultural side of things as to the impact that it's having on employees and what measures that can be put in place. And that's certainly not lost on anyone at the moment. Mm.
And I guess that's affected the sort of work that you're doing as well, Graham, and you're subject to that as well.
Absolutely, I've noticed that a complete, sea change from, being in front of people day to day, facilitating sessions and so on. And I think exactly as you said, normally you might do 1 3-hour session in a day, but 3 hours of that is travelling there, 2 hours of it's travelling, back and so on. You're working in a completely different way. There's a lot of work up front to be able to facilitate a session properly. And when you do get to do it, it's incredibly absorbing. So if you are facilitating something for 3 hours with 10 people online, you're exhausted at the end of it, and you need to recognise that. So even though you don't need to travel home or do anything else, you're going to be tired. So exactly, I think as Gerard said, building gaps, between meetings if you possibly can, and try and organise your day accordingly.
And that's interesting. So you're not just doing the same thing but doing it online. You're actually having to redesign it so that actually you get the same impact as if you were in the room together.
You're redesigning it. You're having to cope with people being remote. You're having to cope with the technology as well. And all of this is sort of going on at the same time. In your mind, it's quite it's really absorbing, and you get a lot done. But you just need to recognise it does take it out of you.
Can I just add something in there as well? Is that one of the things we've been working to develop in the improvement service over the last few months is a series of COVID checklists, essentially. So we've had a successful self-assessment programme running for quite a number of years now, and we've adapted that to focus on how councils are coping during the response to the pandemic. And there's one section on it specifically focusing on support for staff. So it looks at what support is in the place for staff, how do we look after people's mental health and well-being. So those toolkits are there for councils in Scotland to have a look at and allow them to reflect on that. And indeed, there's one or two that's already started to do that. So and that very much kind of not only allows us to share practice amongst authorities as well to find out what's happening elsewhere, but also allows them an opportunity to reflect as well on their own practice. So there's support in place to allow us to be able to help with that.
And that's an interesting segue into a question that's just come in, which is what new behaviours do leaders and managers need to exhibit as staff are increasingly working in the home environment? So does leadership adapt well to being online, Jonathan?
Does it adapt well? I think the biggest challenge for leadership is about being able to both develop, which is now harder, and maintain relational ability. That ability to connect through Zoom or whatever that platform might look like isn't quite the same as being in a room and connecting to somebody in what we call a more normal way. In terms of adaptiveness, I think absolutely that's become a critical behaviour. We've talked about adaptive leadership for years, but if you look at just the nature of the shift in behaviours required by leaders over the last 6 months, it's gone from the immediacy of going into lockdown and being a very driven, focused leader in terms of getting things done, making things happen. Then it's gone into a space of saying, once you've got those processes in place, about saying, how do we work with others in this space? So it's become that relational piece, the partnership piece. And as we're starting to head out, or as we were starting to head out of COVID, it started to look towards the future and become more visioning. Now it's heading back into COVID. Where do we go next? That adaptability, the pace of adaptation of leadership has increased so fast. I think the challenge is knowing contextually where you are and how to adapt to that at that point in time.
Interesting.
Yeah, we spoke about that, it came up earlier in the conference, didn't it? As you were saying, it's where you are in the cycle. Do you go for command and control, where you absolutely take control and tell staff what to do? Or do you go for trust? Those that are closest to the decisions, make the decisions. And it, as you say, it probably depends on the cycle. But it is a real challenge. One of the things that I find is that some people struggle to manage remotely. Some people find it a lot easier. I think, if you are a good manager with good management skills, you'll find it much more easier to convert online. But obviously there are multiple challenges around it.
Interesting. So we had another question come in, which is there is a cultural, following the same theme, there is a cultural challenge in ensuring flexible working is flexible rather than just office at home, or indeed probably 24-hour office at home, and is probably added. So how is this going to be worked through? So any thoughts on the sort of cultural challenge for organisations in moving to home working?
So there's a big part about understanding what that looks like, and that will look different for every single individual. Actually, you choose two individuals, they'll have a different take on where on that continuum it lies. Is it what it was? Is it what it is now? Is it somewhere in between? So for a team, for an organisation, where does that land? Every organisation will have a different take on that. Actually, even within councils, the different departments will have different views on that as well, because they have different requirements. So there's no one space that we're aiming for, and I think that becomes a challenge for everybody, figuring out that and working through that.
Reflects back to what values you're following, doesn't it? I mean, clearly, if you're working remotely, there's got to be a move away from just doing the hours in the office to output that you're providing. But you can take that too far, because obviously you can expect far too much output, and people are just living with their work, day in, day out. So it's trying to get that balance right, really, I think, for each individual team and team member, really.
And not knowing if you're not there, you won't see how much time and effort it's taken to produce that result. So there's someone might have worked all through the evening to produce something the next morning, and then you've got to expect that again and again and again.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Is any sort of comment, Gerard, on that?
Yeah, I would just to agree with what's been said, and I think going back to, I suppose, the previous question as well, I think everyone's learning each day. I don't think anyone would say that we've got this kind of the leadership in a remote world kind of completely sussed yet. But I think what we are seeing is a greater degree of empowerment towards people as well, and a greater degree of trust. And I think what was proven to be in terms of the response phase is it just shows you what can be done within that environment when we do trust people to actually get on and deliver as well. I think it's been a bit of an eye-opener. And I think going towards the notion of how do we start to work flexibly, we've seen a move over the last kind of 3 or 4 years in terms of kind of appraisals, performance management, whatever you want to call it, has moved from this kind of notion of quite kind of specific tasks, etc., that need done to much more of an outcome-focused appraisal system or performance management system. And I think by actually starting to embed that a lot more within organisations, I think it does develop that degree of trust that we need to make remote working and flexible working much more effective or as effective as it can be as we move forward, because I think we probably are seeing the end of the kind of the 9 to 5 almost, which is a good thing, and allow people to work round about their own lives but still feel as if they're empowered to deliver what they're expected to deliver. And I think we've definitely seen a lot more of that, and it's just about, well, how do we harness that? Because we've rushed into remote working, and we all did it very, very quickly. But there are implications from it. So there'll be policy, there'll be legislative implications, there'll be cost implications potentially as well for organisations. So once we get through this, we probably need to just take a bit of a breath and think about how we start to manage that so that it becomes much more sustainable in the longer term.
I think there's probably two things that start to come through for me around this in terms of both leadership and culture. Firstly, I think everybody now accepts that there's no right one solution, no one right answer to anything anymore. There's an answer, and we all work collectively to make that happen. And I think that's becoming an important thought. And another one I heard recently about leadership, which was interesting, was saying, to get this quote right, it was about being an anchor. Leadership's about providing an anchor for people in the storm of uncertainty. Yep. And I loved that phrase. Yep. But actually, for people who are in those leadership spaces, and it's not just the senior managers or the leaders of councils, actually that can be individuals within teams right the way across an organisation, helping support people in terms of their well-being as well. Having those anchor points, that there's some consistency in that, is really important. Yeah.
That's a really interesting, I like the phraseology, anchor in the storm, because I think it probably doesn't just apply to the manager with the team. It probably applies to how local authorities have behaved within their communities. I think there's we talked about it a number of times today, but there's a high level of trust because local authorities are delivered. So that trust from staff to managers, but also residents to authorities. Is that something that came up in your discussions, Graham?
Yeah, people have had to quickly design new processes. For example, in planning, sign off, having, normally it going kind of all around the office on paper, signing this off, quickly, rapidly designing, processes. And in some ways, working online does give a certain freedom. It allows meetings to be convened really quickly. It allows people to get together. You know that generally they're going to be present. It allows for collaboration and the sharing of something that you might be building, a report or a presentation very quickly. So there are certain freedoms as well to it, which obviously need to be managed. But you can sort of get round the habit of kind of emailing everyone about everything, because you might as well just get together and talk it through.
There's also something to add to that, if it's okay if we've got time, is that within the whole remote working field, I think it's very useful to remember as well that the whole governance and decision-making process went online very, very quickly as well.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's something we've realised in the support and the training we run for elected members, is that the speed at which councils manage to put their whole decision-making structures effectively remote working. And some are still doing it as well. I think just shows as well that the crucial role, and we can't forget the crucial role that the elected members play in, I suppose, adapting to that new normal as well, and then the workforce seeing that is an acceptable way to have things working. So the message comes from the administration right through the organisation as well. So that's a very important aspect of it for myself.
Yeah, no, I agree. We were very early on. You were seeing council meetings going online, people working out how to interact with members of the public in a council meeting, how to securely vote online, and all of that happened within days of the first lockdown. So no, I think it's been one of those great successes that actually now we don't think was a great thing. If you'd have talked to people about putting a council meeting online and voting online and opening it to the public prior to that, you probably would have got laughed at. But so we've moved on a lot. One further question around the sort of the staff issues that's come in is both one, how can we support talent? How do we identify and support talent in that remote working environment? And the other one is for those that aren't as capable with digital, how do we help them with their capabilities, their skills, and their comfort with using those sort of methods? Any lessons coming up on that yet?
Really, just I think sort of a bit of patience and having a sort of plan B. I've worked with people at all levels of competence, and sometimes you do get a session where someone hasn't actually managed to join it. So you just need to default to perhaps sending them something and actually talking it through with them. It's still possible to send presentations, talk them through. It's still possible to have a phone conversation. You can't possibly be with them, so you're going to have to use some kind of digital medium or other. But I guess just having a sort of plan B, really.
I think around the talent piece, there's definitely something about using informal space and remembering informal space. It's very easy in the Zoom world to just move from formal session to formal session, focusing on those particular issues, but actually the talent identification piece quite often happens outside of that. So we need to create spaces, even in this virtual world, to enable that to happen. So for me, there's very much something about that informal space.
Thanks for that.
Yeah, just to add to that, I'd like to come back to, I suppose, the second part of that question. Is that what we need to obviously bear in mind is that not everyone has the luxury of going to a study within their house or has a free dining room table all day as well. So there will be employees that we need to make sure that there's sufficient office space for them to access. So it has to be inclusive. I think we sometimes kind of forget the inclusivity that we have to have for employees in terms of being able to provide them spaces to work. So this, going back to what we were talking about earlier, it's kind of going full circle about, you know, is it here to stay? We will need to have some office space, and as it is a balancing act, because we need to think of the employees who don't either have at a basic level might not even have the access to the bandwidth to enable them to work effectively as well, or an effective space as well. So these are all the things in the mix that we need to think about when we're thinking about, I suppose, people being able to make the most of the digital opportunities that they have.
Yeah, thanks for that, Charles. So we've got perhaps a lighter question coming in. So it's we've all faced issues with colleagues and the mute button during Zoom calls. What novel technicalities have you faced over the last few months? So kind of, you know, colleagues standing up and walking away in their boxer shorts, I don't know, but...
Well, I've had the challenge of trying to run a sort of 3-hour workshop across lunch and, you know, kind member of the family sort of bringing me lunch, which was great, you know, so you sort of, you know, get it from the side. But we were discussing earlier, it's then what do you do with it then? It's quite rude to sort of be eating a sandwich, you know, in front of the screen. So you kind of, I think a technique that I learnt was to sort of ask an open-ended question, you know, get people to talk for a bit, and then maybe just come off the camera, you know, for a moment. Or obviously building some, you know, comfort breaks and so on. But yeah, you do get some interesting ones. Another quick one was, you know, we're getting lots of home deliveries from Amazon and so on. And we've got a couple of dogs in the house as well, so the mute button is sort of going on and off the whole time, and it always seems to be when you're in a session. But everybody understands, you know, everybody's got some interruption or somebody walking past, you know, in boxer shorts at some point. So we all seem to be a bit more forgiving, I think, you know, the things that you just wouldn't put up with in the office.
So I was chairing a board meeting, and one of my board members got summoned by his wife to dinner. So that was an exit stage left. Another one, we have a particular focus, a particular group that get together to focus on particular activities, which has become known as the Barking Mad group, because every one of us has a dog who keeps interrupting. So we have one of those. And then a friend of mine had the fabled story of one of their housemates coming in a Borat mankini. But that was far too visual, that one, I think.
Yeah, definitely. Gerard, anything for you?
No, I'm afraid I've got nothing as out there as that. Because I'm in the house myself during the day, I get very jealous of when I'm in Teams meetings with people, and you can see them when they're on mute, indicating from whoever's in the house with them that yes, they would like another cup of coffee or a cup of tea brought to them. Yep. And I'm afraid I don't have that luxury, so I've got to wait till the end to be able to access them myself.
No, I think my only one was I was busy in a Teams meeting, and we were actually having a bit of a door at the back of the house blocked up, so the door had been taken away. There's a gap, and the bricks hadn't gone up yet. And so I was keeping. I've got two, as you know, large 50-kilo German Shepherds, and they were in the room with me. And we've got doorknobs, which I thought were okay, not handles. And the younger one had turned the doorknob, and all I could see was the tail and the bottom disappearing at high speed down the corridor towards the builder, with great glee in his face and a shock look in the builders. So yes, that was the kind of Barking Mad gone wrong. Yeah. The builder fortunately could run quite fast. So that, I mean, we've talked a lot about the kind of the initial response, the burnout, the new forms of leadership, coming out of that, and actually how we build up our resilience individually and collectively. That gets us to coping with peaks. But we are. I've been in meetings with folks from China and New Zealand and others around the world, and the view commonly is, this is the normal. It may get better and worse over time, but living alongside viruses like this is something we have to adapt to. in terms of that adaptation, we therefore need to make sure that our shops, our businesses, all those ordinary places that are part of everyday life can continue in an environment where there may also be a source of infection present. What, if any, lessons are coming up about how we will adapt our everyday life? Is there anything coming through yet on that?
I suppose it's emerging, isn't it, as we sort of think it through. I mean, you know, we've been able to, this is an example today of have a conference actually where some of us are here but socially distanced, some of us are remote. So this is an example of, you know, how we are, you know, day by day adapting to the current situation. Just looking at one of the sort of questions there, you know, what lessons have we learned? One of the things that I was quite concerned about when we went into this initially was that it's really important for me to establish some sort of connection and relationship with a new client, you know, and face-to-face is the only way to do that. So I was quite concerned that it'd be quite difficult to start talking to leaders and chief execs, you know, remotely and to establish that. But actually, that hasn't really been a problem because I think they recognise that you're trying to do that as well. You're talking to people in their homes and so on. So the tone of the conversation is slightly different, but, you know, I don't know if it's a lesson, but it's something that I sort of has kind of dawned on me that it's not as difficult as you might think.
I think there's something about just keeping moving forward. If there's one thing I think the evolution's taught everybody over generations, actually, no matter what the issue is, we will adapt and we will keep moving forwards. I think trying to do that as positively as possible is what's enabling lots of this to carry on. Finding those silver linings, it's the Chinese thing, isn't it, where the other side of crisis is opportunity. How do we come together to keep finding those opportunities and new ways of doing things?
Gerard, any lessons from your side?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I agree with what's been said, and I think the thing for me in terms of what we're learning, I suppose, coming out of it, is that there's the inequality aspect of it as well. And we need to be mindful of supporting the more vulnerable groups in our society to be able to deal with the effects of this, because it's going to affect different groups in different ways. So you look at the economic impact, you potentially look on at the impact of people, vulnerable children and adults as well. Is that whilst we all might, unfortunately, be people who have actually catch the disease or suffer from the disease as well, the actual wider societal implications can affect some pockets of society more than others. So for me, it's about learning the lessons of if moving forward as public authorities. How do we ensure that those support mechanisms continue to be in place for people, particularly if we face challenges like this again over the next kind of few years as well? And I think that should be at the root of our planning for many of our services.
Yes, we've got another question come in that relates to this in a way. It's not just an opportunity for us, but also for our communities. You were mentioning earlier in the day, Jonathan, the idea that people actually now living in more rural communities, actually because they don't need to commute, actually further from cities, actually do have greater opportunity. And for those authorities where perhaps they can't draw in the staff that they need, again, can be dealing with remotely. Is that something that you've been kind of seeing already?
Yeah, and actually, so obviously from Wales, that's something that's become a major focus of regeneration and opportunity. Even for the housing association that I chair, which is based in the valleys, we now have staff who are living in North Wales, we have staff who are living in England, and that just wouldn't have been tenable previously. You'd want them to be in that one space and connecting. So that the availability of talent, the capacity to do things has shifted. The opportunities there's more. Actually, I think now it's much more about finding the right capability rather than trying to find it on your doorstep. So it's a hugely different space.
Yeah, I mean,
there's a couple of things that come up there. I've had a couple of situations where people have started to work in different areas. So there's a planning authority I'm working with on the south coast, and someone there has managed to get promotion to London Borough of Islington. So it's somewhere in London, but they can still live on the coast. The feeling that I have is that as we go forward and as we can draw talent from everywhere and not just geographically close by, that the brand and reputation of the organisation is going to be equally, if not more important, to the sort of geographic location. Because as you would know, it's sort of come to Wales, green and pleasant valleys, but it's actually going to be the brand of the organisation that you're going to want to work for. Because in theory, You could literally, work for an organisation from anywhere. So that's going to become really important.
Yeah, so I mean, think of it myself, I think that one of the areas yet which I think we've got to capitalise on, I think there's been a huge range of developments, both technical and process, in other sectors in the country and around the world. And I think we need to onboard some of those. Our approach is relatively undeveloped. So there are technical solutions now, which I saw one last week, which you plug it into your air system and it will clean the building of any virus in the air. You can get things that will coat the surfaces of tables and walls, and it will keep any COVID coming off on it for 10 days. So lots of technical solutions which will help us adapt our environment. So there is a really clear, I think, light at the end of the tunnel. This isn't going to just be about continually recovering from spikes in infection. And I think we start to bring some of those technical solutions together, we will certainly see an ability to flourish in that sort of virus-laden environment. So there is more positive things to come. I think we've come to the end of our session here, and so I'm just going to wrap up with some closing remarks. First of all, before I go on to that, just to thank the team here, Graham, Jonathan and Gerard. Thank you all for your contributions in this session. And then overall, I'd just like to thank Peter and the team from CLIP behind the scenes who've kept the technology going for the day. I'd like to thank Annabelle and Sharif from the iESE team who've helped to, have organised us and kept us on track during the day and kept everything going that you've seen. It's been a fantastic, and thank you as the audience, over 300 people participating in this event today, so that's brilliant. And thanks, of course, to all the amazing speakers who've joined us either here or online. A great day and a great number of really interesting points. Starting the day with regeneration, never more important than it is now. We have seen trends that are affecting our communities for some time. The pandemic has radically accelerated them, and as we've said in this session here today, there are threats from the way in which property within an area, the values will change, the use will change, and that's going to affect economically the sector as well as our communities. But on the other hand, as you said, Jonathan, there are opportunities in that. Actually, there are opportunities to reshape our communities and actually bring life to them through digital in ways that they weren't there before. We moved on to community enablement and actually what that really means around creating vibrant and resilient communities, and clearly seeing those participants that actually had engaged in that in depth before the pandemic being able to respond very fast and very, very, very clearly, and actually helping build that trust that we know is so important in that response. And then we followed on that with continuing the digital trend and needing to get things done in the right way to deliver results quickly. Some brilliant examples from Kate in Cumbria, from Joanne in Trafford, about how they had developed, sector developing a track and trace app in less than 10 days at no cost to the authority, with one person doing the job amongst 10 other things. I think there's some lessons for central government there in what delivery means. And then finally to our session that we've just had on public service adaptation. There is a light at the end of the tunnel. Not only have we succeeded in that initial emergency response, actually, if we look after ourselves and our colleagues and do what we do best, which is learn that best practice and share it amongst ourselves, we will build the communities that rebound from this stronger than they were before. We will build back better. So thank you all for joining us here today, and goodbye from all of us at iESE, and go well.